Andy Warhol famously said, "I lost interest in human relationships once I got my first TV." Well, that certainly isn't the case with James LaBrie, who has produced this album, which is all about that sense of interconnectedness, communication, and even the little deceits and angles that often operate within and between us. But is it any good? Let's find out, shall we? Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of New Album Review, and today we're going to be looking at Beautiful Shades of Grey by James LaBrie. As always at this point I ask you please do click like, subscribe and check all the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at this channel. It's always much appreciated. This is an album that deviates from that Dream Theater remit, and why shouldn't it? It's devoid of all those challenging and drastic tempo shifts, those heavy conceptual themes and virtuosic showboating, all that flashy stuff. It's just not as noodly as my daughter might say. Instead we're moving more towards I don't want to use the word conventional, more straight-laced, no-nonsense rock. And he says, lowering his voice, even veering dangerously into sort of power ballad territory. This album, according to the blurb, sees LaBrie traversing personal maturation, loss, a myriad of complex relationships and other things. But one thing that is apparent is his drive for perfection in terms of his vocals, songwriting, and music in general. This album took shape just as the global pandemic began to emerge, so it's another one of those blessed lockdown albums, I guess. And it's in part a collaboration with Eden's Curse bassist John Logue. This is an artistic relationship that's been going on for a while, I think. In fact, I think James LaBrie sings guest vocals on the Eden's Curse number No Holy Man, a track that's to be found on their Trinity album, by the way. On the album, Logue plays acoustic and rhythm guitar, as well as recruiting Eden Curse's keyboardist Christian Polkanen. Gosh, I hope I've said that correctly. And believe it or not, the percussive duties fall to James LaBrie's son, Chance LaBrie. Beautiful Shades of Grey is about human interconnection, motives, and simply being, which are the core themes of the album. An album that seems to be all about what it is to be, well, to be us, really. And if I may quote, Beautiful Shades of Grey presented an opportunity to express his love and enthusiasm he feels for great songwriting through a vehicle that wasn't tied to the same rules and archetypes of his other projects. I suppose in layman's terms, it ain't Dream Theater. Although in saying that, these songs are not bereft of the theatrical in terms of the dynamic range and the topics explored, things like love, deceit and grief, which all fit quite nicely together in my opinion. James LaBrie has said that a lot of these lyrics are dealing with the beauty of human beings and a lot are dealing with the grey areas of the in-between. But for me, it's those grey areas that are intriguing. What would Othello be without his Iago? That's what I say. There's an album that can focus on the dull splurge of the everyday, as well as the sparkle of something new, as well as the dull ache of loss. For me, the idea of this album is not to be revolutionary, explore, find something new within any sort of given genre, God forbid, but it's about exploring beautifully, I have to add, as well as bringing together decades of inspiration from different artists. And I must admit, on first listening, I rather like this album. There's lots of infectious hooks and beautiful instrumentation employed. The first track on the album is Devil in Drag. You get this slow swell of synth that's punctuated by some quite delicate acoustic guitar work. LaBrie, who wrote all the songs on this album, apart from Wildflower, I believe, he said that the song was written about someone who started out as a decent human being, but along the way lost touch with their roots and over time becoming self-serving, narcissistic and devoid of principles and values. My word, I wonder who it could be. I suppose the key is in the title, isn't it? Devil in Drag. The idea of something very dark and sinister masquerading as something else. Supernova Girl is being described as an adventurous and lovelorn number. Even has a Beatlesque vibe with that gentle acoustic strum and LaBrie's very breathy vocals lending the whole thing a hushed, intimate quality. And that's before we get the very infectious chorus. That seems to be a bit of a motif on this album, as the songs are very, very appealing, especially on first listen, which is a bit of a deviation from the old Dream Theater mould, I think. Lovely, clean, bluesy guitar work on here. I would even describe it as Gilmore-esque in some places. give and take. I love the crisp flamenco sound of the guitar at the start of this one, and with the keyboards it sounds a little bit like an 80s power ballad. At one point I felt compelled to hold my lighter up in the air, but again a delightful chorus that just draws you in. This album not only sounds great, but unlike much of Dream Theater stuff, it's actually quite accessible. A perfect gift for your Auntie Maud, perhaps. And I don't mean that as a criticism. You know, you can just float along with these numbers and enjoy the melodies, rather than feeling this is an album that's been made solely for the beard strokers. Then we get Sunset Ruin. This is one of the standout tracks on this album. The lovely use of cello, which adds an air of something very melancholic about it, an aesthetic that's also communicated by LaBrie's very expressive vocals. This song is almost in remembrance, I wouldn't say requiem, but certainly in remembrance of LaBrie's brother who passed away with pancreatic cancer in 2016. You know, there's an REM song where they say it's easier to leave than to be left behind. And this number, which is not just a dedication, but one that touches upon the very nature of grief, I think. George Eliot famously said that our loved ones are never dead to us until we've forgotten them. And songs like this very much embody that sentiment. The track Hit Me Like a Brick, it seems to be about a number about false pretenses and deception. Maybe a sense of self-deception as well. A great keyboard moment during the soloing that has something of a bit of a Deep Purple vibe to it, I think. Wildflower, excellent Tom Petty-esque number, and I don't just mean it because it's called Wildflower. This is the one number, of course, that wasn't written by James LaBrie. Great acoustic 12-string work supported by the atmospheric swell of keyboards, with LaBrie's vocal sitting nicely on top. I have to say the production on this album is superb. Get a rather odd little number called Conscience Calling, which has this multi-voiced, almost Gregorian sounding number, Gregorian chant, has all these voices sort of swell within your head as you listen to it, perhaps hence the title, which segues into What I Missed. A clear vocal performance here by LaBrie, accompanied beautifully by the piano. Some great crisp acoustic strumming. Seems to be a number about regrets, and maybe what the poet Philip Larkin would call all the love torn off unused. Am I Right is another one of my favourites on this album. It has a very Paul Simon-esque vibe to it with the finger-picking guitar. LaBrie sings about the creaks and cracks that reveal themselves in any relationship. This is a superb number, and as to stick with the Paul Simon analogy, it has a very homeward bound vibe to it, especially when the steady beat of the bass drum comes in. Great vocal harmonies and nice use of sort of double tracking on this one. Then we get the kind of homage or tribute to Led Zeppelin with a very spirited and faithful, I have to say, cover of Ramble On, before we get the Devil in Drag, the electric version. Overall, I have to say the songs anyway are tight, beautifully structured and well executed, and a greater emphasis on melody and brevity. It's very different from what you'd expect from the work that James LaBrie does with Dream Theater. Anyway, you've been watching an episode of New Album Review, where we've been discussing the latest release by James LaBrie, Beautiful Shades of Grey. This will be available, I believe, at the end of May. You can pre-order it now. Of course, I will put the purchasing link just below this video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Do check some of the cards that are appearing up there now. Other than that, I hope you're well and staying healthy. But more important than those things, of course, is that you keep listening.